All right, so I think we got some people on. We're going to go ahead and get started. We will have this session recorded, so there will be a recording available afterwards, but we do appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day to join us. We're excited to talk to you a little bit about automating OT and cybersecurity assessment management throughout the life cycle of those assets. As far as who's who on the call, my name is Evan McClure. I'm the host, director for GRC IRM, responsible for the energy and utility as well as federal and state. We also have two speakers today joining us. Mitch Blackburn, he's the co-host and the global head of energy and utility solutions at ServiceNow. Mitch, do you want to make a couple introductory statements?
Yeah, so first, thanks for everybody joining and investing some time with us today. I am part of the ServiceNow industry team, specifically focused on energy and utility, which is kind of the coming together for me of a background in technology, all the way from being in a Big Four consulting firm through working for one of the large IOUs here in the States, and now being part of the ServiceNow team, helping our customers leverage ServiceNow to make their energy and utility business better. So thanks for having me to the Templar team. And again, thanks everybody for investing some time today to learn more about this.
Thank you, Mitch. And then we also have Nick Friedman on the call. He's the president and managing partner at Templar Shield.
Yeah, thanks again for everyone's time today. Nick Friedman, President Managing Partners, Templar Shield, as Evan mentioned. I've been in the enterprise risk management space a little over 20 years and about more than a decade in the utility sector experience. So I'm really looking forward to sharing our overview with you guys today and hear if there's any questions you guys have. Back to you, Evan.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so as far as the topics that we're going to be covering today, just wait for the slides to flip a little bit. So if you look at today's agenda, we're going to start by providing some key statistics around where the risk lives by industry and the different drivers or challenges on why OT asset management is important. From there, we'll pivot to those managing of those cyber assets in the IT and OT space. Then we'll hand it off to Mitch to discuss the power of the ServiceNow platform, the importance of data compartmentalization using ServiceNow solutions, and then we'll take a deeper dive into some of the integration capabilities with sensor or other technologies and how they relate to the build out of your overarching OT asset management program. And then finally, we will talk a little bit about OT vulnerability response and some content using FoxGuard. Again, if you have any questions, please type them in chat. We'll do our best to get to them at the end of the session. So a common question is, why build an OT support model? Or why does OT asset management matter? What's the big deal with it? How is it different than IT risk management? So as you can see in this graph, this kind of depicts where the industrial control system security risk lives by industry. And if you see this, 41% of that is energy and utilities, and then 2/3 of those risks are considered medium to high. So most utilities are kind of dealing with a few main deficiencies around OT asset management. The overarching goal, right, is to reduce the risk and increase the safety and reliability across operational technology. Organizations which are non-NERC SIP facilities can leverage their existing IT services and technologies with proper designation, separation of duty, identification of these IT and OT assets, and then understanding those differences between OT and IT really allow for that innovation and convergence. And then, most utilities are dealing with a few main deficiencies in general. Think about asset onboarding. Maybe there's not enough consultants or resources to support those assets. They're spread across multiple facilities in different locations. The help desk is a little bit different, so OT is not prioritized. There's time impacts as a result. A lot of the OT&E follows the standard IT SLAs and process, but that's just not sufficient for OT entities. And then you think of, do we have enough resources available to support? Everybody's stretched a little thin. We have different tools and vendors or capabilities and technology. We have to leverage a lot of contractors. And then there's just a general lack of visibility or asset inventory. So having a centralized asset record or CMDB can help with some of these challenges. So the main goal of what we're discussing today is how to better manage your IT and your OT assets with greater clarity and control with 4 main objectives: preventing unplanned downtime, boosting productivity, driving resilience, and keeping your enterprise competitive and safe. ServiceNow does provide a great solution, which we'll take a deeper dive into, around how IT and OT can be managed on a single system. And this ensures the action to secure the utility enterprise. And it can also sit on top of your existing digital investments in order to maximize potential. Now I'm going to hand it off to Nick to talk more about the managing the cyber assets throughout their life cycle.
Thanks, Evan. What I briefly want to talk about today is, with our experience in the utility sector as it relates to cyber asset management, we hear a lot of opportunities for maturity. And all in all, the more you have your arms wrapped around your assets to process the assets, the better off you're going to be. Specifically, operating and reporting requirements that are required for these assets should be an easier task for all of your end users. And simply put, you can't manage and maintain what you don't know you have, and you surely can't defend it. So what we see in many utilities needs that are met today with the multiple of ad hoc and Band-Aid processes, right? Today, we want to walk you through the use cases on the slide. We want to start with procurement. There's a tremendous value in establishing a centralized pre-approved asset catalog that aligns to a standardized set of opportunities for optional assets that procurement can quickly acquire and set up in a CMDB. Right. Number 2, once that asset's acquired, it can easily be commissioned, racked and stacked via workflow, which automates the reviewer and approver process while adding device attributes into the CMDB record. And then as a standard operating procedure, this should satisfy regulatory requirements by maintaining asset classification, validation requirements, and with the added benefit of automated tasks and reminders, as well as an established chain of custody and ownership that maps to TSA and NERC processes. Via the project management process, once the product and operational acceptance is reached, then you've got to manage the ongoing release management, assessments, ongoing monitoring, workflows, as well as the vulnerability and patch management process. And that all needs to be tracked and reported easily and efficiently. And finally, we want to address the continuous lifecycle of change management process, which includes asset lifecycle management, continuous monitoring of checks and balances, via the enablement of automated discovery, assessments, configuration compliance, and the subsequent incident management problem and change management workflow. And so if we start end to end at this use case, that should give you guys what you guys need here to mature your program. Now, what you're looking at is, from our experience, a standard utility risk landscape based on the experience of, broader energy and utility experience in the space. And while this is not an exhaustive list that we're going to go through, from our utility experience, these are the high risk areas for utilities. Now, as we click through, we can see how utilities, people, process, and technology teams start to expand. It quickly becomes apparent that this environment is neither scalable or maintainable. And when we look at utility clients in the sample representation of siloed teams trying to string together a program, right? What we see is utilities have historically leveraged spreadsheets and later matured to silo point solutions. And from them had system integrators create, APIs to connect some of these systems. And the other gaps were filled by emails and phone calls. And even if this can be defined as effective, we don't feel it's efficient. And in the background, we have to perform root cause analysis and to avoid reoccurrence, plus ensure the governance, risk, and compliance records are completed for the event. Just not an easy thing to do. As we continually see, automation is key. And with the Now platform, all of these solutions can live in the same place. And it's a good thing. At least it's a defined process. And quite often you look at these things as a first step, which will actually be worked out what the process is. So let's imagine what this could look like if we started to apply some of the technologies that we've talked about previously. And the first step is, how do we initiate the sharing of data to maintain referential data integrity? What you're seeing here is we've automated the process, but can we improve it? Could we do better than before? We can start to analyze the results and ask questions like, Are we collecting the right information? Are we categorizing things correctly? Are we preventing duplicative efforts? Are the right resources being identified? Or are we seeing multiple reassignments during the lifecycle change management process? And if you look at the top of this here, this aligns to the NERC and TSA management workflow of acquisition, availability, applicability, baseline, validation, and deployment. And if you look at the bottom area, this aligns to the ServiceNow use cases of service catalog, asset visibility, field service management, CMDB asset discovery, NERC and TSA compliance, as well as vulnerability response in the foundation. So when we recall the first opening slide on the use case, I want to walk through an example of the workflow, right? And in this example, we're going to walk through a path of a typical asset that would take across a business unit within an organization. So I'm an IT admin at the typical enterprise organization in the utility space. And I'm tasked with implementing a new platform for new mission critical applications to help track customer orders. So first step, I need to know what servers are offered by my organization and how I can configure them. And for this, I need a catalog list of items and a way to submit a request. The request needs to be routed and approved through asset managers to have visibility to which items we have in stock and need to be replenished. And once the request is approved and sourced, the asset then needs to be provisioned with the requested specifications, and finally delivered. Now that I have the device or the server or the OT, asset, I need to install it. If it's a server, rack it in our data center. And this is now literally one of thousands of devices in the environment. And as an IT admin, I need to see the entire landscape and asset on the network, how they are configured, what software and hardware they're running, and their location. So as the servers are inventoried with the appropriate information, controls are automatically scoped to the server based on the relevant information with no manual effort required. And this now allows us to track compliance with the applicable regulations for CIS, ISO, NIST, NERC, TSA. Right. And now that I can see where the assets are configured, I need to go to my server and work with the organization by implementing the order tracking application. For this, you're going to need to see the demand on the application team, what projects they're working on, and where this application or asset might fit in. And this allows me to streamline the process based on the business application and need. Once the order tracking application is located, loaded, and running, now I need to be able to monitor the technology, right, and understand what issues may arise. And I need to use intelligence to monitor all log files and events to predict failures and outages before they occur. And in the event that a change or update is needed, I may need a robust change management process, so I can manage this quickly and simply. I also need to know what external threats my technology asset may be vulnerable to, what weaknesses my hardware applications may have. And is this asset susceptible to an external attack, as Evan was talking about earlier? And as controls need to be scoped and implemented, we need to continuously monitor the efficacy of those controls to various methods, including key control indicators, key risk indicators, and monitor any data available. Now, yes, we also need to talk about what that full life cycle manages, and then how that we're going to take that asset and deliver it, manage it, maintain it, and then eventually retire the asset. And so as you go through that process, you can quickly see how the life cycle of this can get complicated. And without a workflow engine in place, it can be very difficult. Now, when we consider the current or heritage processes of the energy generation and energy transmission, distribution and storage, we need to consider how these solutions enable or impact our utility commercial customers, their residential customers, and ultimately their enterprise business services. And as we look forward to automation capabilities that are available to utilities, we need to consider four main areas. Intelligent energy generation requires automation via integrated data model for continuous monitoring. We've got intelligent transmission and distribution and storage, which requires operation and cyber asset management. We've got intelligent interconnected self-solutions, and you need self-service programs for those. And those required automated field service management solutions. And then manual functions and activities that require automation via the advanced enterprise risk management solution. And as you can see here, like as in the previous slide, this aligns to the acquisition, availability, applicability, validation, deployment, and baseline requirements for TSA and NERC. And we've also aligned this to the ServiceNow solutions. So, as we've walked through that lifecycle asset management process, a lot of people ask us, where's the data stored? How are we managing that data? How do you manage NERC and TSA requirements for data separation and segregation, especially with ServiceNow being a SaaS platform? And so to answer that, I want to hand it over to Mitch so that he can jump in and really walk you guys through how ServiceNow handles that.
Thanks, Nick. And give it a second to move to the next screen here. So if you look at the overall frame here, you'll see ServiceNow is one unified platform with one data model and one architecture. So within the platform, all of these things exist and are integrated naturally as part of how the system is built. However, in these highly regulated entities, we know that there needs to be all the right kinds of security segregation. So to kind of look at a couple of examples here, you can see that you have the ability to identify the divide between people who work on maybe IT assets, and there may be a different group that work on OT assets, and there may even be a group that needs to work on both of those together. So you have the ability to dial in that control to make sure that the right people with the right roles are doing the right thing. You can also look at, within like a NERC environment, who needs to work on high impact versus medium impact. TSA looking at, the different roles, et cetera, distribution. The key point here is you have this one unified platform so that the data and the workflows can cross the enterprise. But within those workflows and within this single platform, you can specifically identify who the right people are to access the right work, access the right data, but without going outside the boundaries. From my background, working in large utility, while we want everybody to have all the tools they want, the other thing we want is them to have none of the tools, none of the access that they don't need, because that's what helps us manage our risk. And candidly, it also helps us respond better to things like audits and things of that nature. So as we go to the next slide, we want to highlight kind of how ServiceNow is approaching these workflows. So today, within the industry, we've long had tools for governance, risk, and compliance, IT asset management, procurement, et cetera. And ServiceNow has been a leader in a lot of those areas for a long time. And we've also had some great OT solutions at the level where they're able to passively find those assets, identify vulnerabilities, and things of that nature. But one of the gaps that we saw in ServiceNow was companies are looking for a platform that helps in that secure way we just talked about, bridge across those things and really look at OT as its own specific kind of capability. So we took some of our existing capabilities and we extended the ServiceNow capabilities to specifically look at OT as from the perspective of where does that data come from and how do we make sure that we ingest the data the right way. So it required different partnerships, different integrations, and most importantly, a different data model. We needed to look at the security model a little differently because the IT security model for normal corporate IT is a little different than managing OT by plants and plant management teams, et cetera. So we need to look at the security model differently. And we also need to look at those workflows a little differently. So out of that, ServiceNow has then extended in a more OT specific way, kind of 4 core capabilities that I'll touch on real quickly. One is, how do you build that foundation of that OT data? How do I find it? And not just find it, but how do I get it cataloged and get that catalog, or as Nick described earlier, that CMDB together, where I can have a complete list of everything, because I can't protect it unless I know what it is. So stage 1 is just that foundation of how do I collect all those things. The second part is, it's important to understand how those things relate, and relate in a couple of different ways. How do they physically relate to each other? How do I know which element is upstream or downstream from another element? So if I need to do work on a specific element, I know what I might be impacting, and I can make good decisions around where and when that should be done. I also need to know what processes it's impacting, and from a risk perspective, I need to know which of those are high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So I need this ability to visualize that environment. You can see a picture there of this ability to kind of have a visual map of how these things connect physically, process-wise, and also looking at kind of the risk perspective. The next thing we saw was, as I understand that, now I need to be able to, first and foremost, understand those vulnerabilities that may exist for these OT assets. So when there's a vulnerability, I need to not only know what it is, but I need to be able to look at some of the risk analysis around what's going on, where is it, and then going back to that visibility, being able to understand what parts can I work on when, and how do I prioritize and plan that work. And then lastly, as Nick described, in the IT environment, they've long had these processes around problem management, incident management, things of that nature. So this is ServiceNow's offering to help manage OT specific things in an OT specific way, but using some of that core rigor around how do you manage services. And again, can't overemphasize, it all still sits on that one core unified platform that has these abilities to secure, encrypt, and segregate the right roles for the right people. So if we go a little bit one layer down and just take a picture of what that flow might look like specific to, let's say, vulnerability management. So one, ServiceNow has really strong integration capabilities. And here's a few examples of those where we can ingest what are the vulnerabilities that exist out there. Secondly, as we look at those and we map those to the assets that we know that we have, so within that CMDB, that single source of truth for those assets, we can now start mapping things like, how should I prioritize this in the work based on that context, that mapping, those processes, etc. Third, now we can orchestrate across various functions and teams, again, with the right security, the right segregation of duty, and those kinds of things, and manage the overall remediation process and any of the change processes that have to happen. I was with the customer yesterday where that was, while we talk about all these cybersecurity steps, we need to make sure that they are being done in a proper change process to make sure that not only is it being done well, but we can demonstrate that it's done well. As Nick mentioned, highly regulated environments, it's not just doing it right, it's being able to demonstrate that you've done it right. Also, the ability to look at assignment gaps. So if we identify a vulnerability of something that doesn't have a proper assignment, we don't know who the owning team is, for example, we can trigger a workflow to say, hey, there's a gap in the ownership chain. Let's make sure that we fill that quickly. And then managing exceptions and deferrals. Sometimes there's a vulnerability that might be urgent, but we need to defer it for a period of time because we need to align it with some other outage activities. And again, all within this one core platform for insight. And I by no means plan to drain the slide other than to point out, these are the kinds of integrations. So on the prior slide, you saw there were a handful of integrations along the way, but that's not the limit of them. When we look at the overall richness of ServiceNow as a platform, we have pre-built integrations to a number of things, ranging from what we would consider kind of cybersecurity, OT kinds of solutions, like you see Dragos on here, or Clarity. We have integrations to ERP solutions like SAP. We have integrations to customer relationship management like Salesforce. And while each of these may not be applicable to a specific thing like OT security or risk management, together, they enable your enterprise to have these end-to-end processes, make sure that they're integrated, and as Nick described earlier, you have that end-to-end audit trail to make sure that as things are happening, we're able to describe what that looks like. And to that point, we recognize from a strategic level, analytics are really critical to managing your business for the best outcomes, the most effectiveness, and the greatest efficiency. And it's really important to put those in the right context, and even more important to make it where that data is understood and actionable, so you can push action out of what you're doing. So this is an example of a CIO dashboard. And we have these kinds of dashboards available that present that data in the right context, and it helps you, and you can tune these to your specific organizational priorities. And it's not just one pretty picture, if you will, So something like this might be helpful, but we've also integrated in it the ability to drill down. So when you see a number on here that makes you nervous, like the number of, what are the high priority vulnerabilities or something of that nature, you can continue to drill down in that, understand that better. And then also from that drill down, start creating actions, assign work to people. And again, because you're doing this from the analysis down to the work, and it's all in one core platform, all of these things are being run in a unified way and being tracked back to your ability to kind of demonstrate your compliance. And one of the most important things is it doesn't take a report writing or degree or special certifications to create these kinds of dashboards. Most of these dashboards are what we call, kind of drag and drop or point and click, where you can configure these from a business perspective without requiring any deep or complex analysis or long lead times. Ooh. I jumped the gun there. Sorry. Back up a couple of slides. So before I hand it back to Nick, I just want to kind of go back to, as we talk about the single unified platform, you'll see across the top, the intent is, in the context of these assets, be able to drive the process all the way from the initial demand, the initial request for some sort of asset, all the way through the steps of get it, deploy it, make sure it's monitored and reported, patched, maintained, all the way through the disposal process. And also, we recognize this line of assets is blurring. What used to be, there were clearly IT assets, there were clearly operational assets. Some of those lines are blurring, especially when we look at things like smart grid projects, where you think about an automated meter. Is that a OT thing? Is that an IT thing? Is it a whole other thing? The lines are blurring, and so you still need this one kind of core platform to be able to manage those. And then, as briefly described earlier, if you look at that center section, there's a number of other workflows that ServiceNow enables. So think about, for the people that need to go do this work, they have these roles that are specialized in these different things. Those people have to be hired. You have to onboard those people. You have to make sure they get their certifications. As they change jobs, you need to change their access. And so we have integrations, we have capabilities around how do you manage the HR process. We have integrations capabilities around how do you manage the field service process. So a number of different things. Again, while not the focus of today's conversation, just be thinking about, this platform enables you to have that unified view into these capabilities, workflows, and data across your enterprise. And I'll hand it back to Nick. He's got a couple other things to focus on. And again, as time permits, we'll be happy to answer questions if you'll drop those in the chat or Q&A.
Perfect. Thanks, Mitch. When we look at programs and opportunities for maturity, we take a process of what we call BPFCA, right? Business process, framework, content, and automation. Now, we briefly saw how, from a center out strategy early on, there was the existing business process, but that if we realigned the workflow, we could take that business process and improve it and streamline it. Now, of course, the framework piece of that is going to be TSA, NERC, ZIP, right? Your internal ISO, NIST, security protocols, and every different framework that you get in there. One of the things that ServiceNow can do is help you create that test once, comply many control library. And that's really the value that we hear from customers in this concept of a single platform for asset management. So we can upload all of those frameworks and we ensure we mature the business process and we add content. Then the automation really comes into play and provides a high level of return on investment. Now, a lot of you probably know NERC's recently reached out, and they're currently working on proposed rules for a cyber investment rebate program for up to 200 basis points of any cross-state energy sales, which is top of mind for a lot of companies. We're going to be having a later webinar to cover that around what that entails. But simply put, it's anything above and beyond the NERC SIP baseline requirements for cybersecurity. And that should include software, as the current proposed rules were written at the end of 2022, implementation services, consulting services, staff augmentation services, managed services, outsourced services. So, I think the federal government is really focused, especially with the NERC Institute, that they understand that maturing cyber risk management across the energy and utility sector in this country is top of mind for everyone. And Mitch went through a lot of the technology automation capabilities, right? What scanners and sensor integration and process integration and other communication integrations that ServiceNow has pre-built on their Integration Hub enterprise license. And then we've talked about, OT visibility, OT CMDB and asset management, OT foundation, OT vulnerability response. And I feel really when they integrate that with OT service management so that we can send out field engineers, right, with the patches needed, with the updates needed based on the tools that Mitch covered, should provide, the workflow capabilities and an end-to-end audit trail. But scanners don't catch everything. Sensors don't catch everything. And so from TemplaShield and ServiceNow perspective, when we're working with Department of Energy, a lot of utility companies around the country, what we do to supplement the content in the BPFCA is we work with FoxGuard Solutions. And so FoxGuard Solutions works directly, as you can see here, Schweitzer Engineering, Cisco, Microsoft, Checkpoint, Cisco, Garrett, a lot of different OT manufacturers, and the list goes on. And they work with them directly to identify vulnerabilities. They also provide OT program maturity consulting services, right? And when they're working with the manufacturers, they're identifying device IDs, model numbers, if there's a known vulnerability, if a patch has been released yet or updated, the FoxGuard review date, the vendor release date, and security updates. Now, once there's a patch available, it's definitely going to hit, CSS, CVV scores, and notifications. So that you guys can patch these. But one of the other things that they provide is this patch and update security report, so that there are times when you may not have access or a single location to get all of the patches. And they provide that to us, provide that to you guys as customers. And we do have an integration to ingest the patch availability report into OT service management and into the OT vulnerability response solutions in ServiceNow. So you're not only getting real-time data from your sensors and your tools, but also from a content provider like FoxGuard. And they don't only provide the patch and update security report. A big thing that they do that is hard for a lot of companies to get is a vulnerability report for the similar devices. And the reason that is because these manufacturers are not going to release a vulnerability notification until they have a patch. So what FoxGuard's consultings in the OT space will do, they come up with workarounds, recommendations, different management solutions for these vulnerabilities, and provide the vulnerability notification report a lot of times before it hits the markets with CSS, CVV reports, et cetera. And so we also ingest this data into the platform to provide that whole business process, framework, and content perspective needed for the program so that the automation really provides that value. Now, when we look at all of that, right, we understand that, there's a crawl, walk, run process to these programs. And so a lot of utilities and energy companies have asked us, hey, where do we start? Well, we don't want to boil the ocean, right? We want to start maybe with, a network team or an ICS SCADA team, or if you're a water authority, maybe, the specific sensors for, the chemicals that are being added, electricity and natural gas generation, as well as the distribution, right? Upstream, midstream, downstream processes, doing a little current state assessment, understanding where the most return on investment would be and the lowest hanging fruit and highest value. And we come in and we can help start with some of those projects. So between ServiceNow's automation engine, between TemplaShield's OT service management, program consulting and advisory solutions, and FoxGuard's content and their consulting solutions, and integrating with all of the partners like we saw on a previous slide that Mitch talked about, Dragos, Forescout, a lot of these solutions, Nozomi, right, that we see there are integrations with a lot of these tools so that you can leverage your existing investments. Let's take everything you've currently invested in, assess current state, assess the desired state, and create that incremental, launch, mature, and optimize roadmap over several years. As I briefly talked about that NERC program coming out, it was funded, I believe, by the cybersecurity, by the infrastructure investment bill the Biden's administration signed into law in the mid 2021. It's a 5-year bill. So we don't have to solve all the problems in year one, but let's start in 2023 and figure out what the next 5-year roadmap looks like for you guys. So I know we talked a lot about the problem, how we're addressing the problem, what the future state looks like, but we know still getting your arms around the OT infrastructure that you guys have inherited over the past 10, 20, 30, sometimes 40 or 50 years, depending on the utility and energy companies, is something that needs to be approached first. So, ServiceNow has built a purpose-built solution for IT and OT, energy and utility cyber asset management workflow in 4 different areas, plus the integration hub, plus the content from FoxGuard and our consulting and advisory services. And we feel that collectively, this could really be of beneficial additional support to a lot of your teams. So what we'd be happy to do, we're going to be sending out this recording to everyone. We're going to go through a few more slides here on referenceable clients and processes. But simply put, in this slide is what we talked about today, right? How do we identify requesting an asset, manage asset visibility, infrastructure demand, and the portfolio breakdowns within that, manage vulnerability response and patch management, go through the technology risk and compliance, so IT and OT risk assessments, the field service management risk assessments from both people, process, and technology, and how do we put that all through a regulatory compliance platform with our integrated risk management or GRC solutions that ServiceNow offers, manage asset configuration compliance, and manage asset retirement. I know a lot of energy utility companies that we work with are currently in the process of not only adding new devices, but retiring a lot of assets that have been on their network for quite some time. So we'd be happy to walk you through a technology demonstration of everything we talked about today. Before we end, I think you guys are probably wondering, what companies has ServiceNow and Templar worked with, right? What are some referenceable ROI and value propositions that you guys have provided to some clients? So real quick, I'd like to bring back Mitch to talk about, these 8 references that ServiceNow has for you guys.
Thanks, Nick. So we definitely have a great footprint in energy and utilities, and by looking at some of these logos, you'll recognize it includes the U.S., it includes EMEA, it includes companies that are between the U.S. and EMEA, like National Grid. So these are the kinds of customers that are relying on ServiceNow in the energy and utility industry. We've got over 400 worldwide. I'll highlight a couple because they're more tuned to specifically the risk area, if you will. But you'll see that some of these, like National Grid, has made improvements around their overall asset management, their IT, if you will, suite of things. NG, who's looked at how do they coordinate some of those things differently. Suncor, more of a how do they look at that end-to-end process. But I'm gonna, if you will, pick on this Fortune 500 energy company, which is a customer but hasn't chosen to be referenceable yet, but we're hoping they will soon. But so this OT solution I specifically spoke about earlier, they recognized the need that they really had to get a clearer, more specific handle on what are all the OT elements in their world. And in addition to all those OT elements, start working up that maturity of knowing what they are, gaining visibility, so they could better respond to some of the questions they were getting from internal and external audits, regulators, et cetera. And so they've implemented the solution, and in fact are continuing to grow it over the next few years to kind of fully cover their suite of OT elements, if you will. Companies like Parker Wellbore, and this isn't as much of an asset story, but this is more about, how do we make sure that we're complying with other parts of the process? So one of the things they wanted to do was have a better handle around how does that end-to-end process work when we offboard somebody, employee or contractor, because any of us who have dealt with some of these regulations, some of the most important parts are when somebody has access, how do I get them off of the access when they're done with their job, when they leave the company, when they're off of our contract. So they leverage ServiceNow to help them accelerate and track back to being able to provide evidence that they were indeed offboarding people. They were offboarding people in the right amount of time and removing all the access, revoking access, and things like that. And then next is an example of, how do I manage that process of the audits. So part of being compliant is you go through audit processes, and part of those audit processes is not only having the data, being able to collect the data and then correct the data and correct those deficiencies. So you see, as an example, they not only lowered their deficiencies by 50%, but they did that while lowering their email burden by 68%. And while we all love email, we use it every day. I think anybody who's ever tried to collect evidence that's an email chain knows that is really tough evidence chain to follow. So having kind of this end-to-end system really helps them do that. So again, here's some examples. There's more on the ServiceNow website. There's more that we could talk about, as you want to have those conversations. So happy to share those as well. So Nick, back to you.
I think Evan, if you have any, want to manage some of the questions coming in for Mitch.
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and kind of take chat. I said type them in chat when I started this, but Q&A, there should be a Q&A section down at the bottom. So you can type your questions there if you have any. We do have one here that's a good question for Mitch. So the general concern I hear from OT is that Snow is SaaS based, so it's in the cloud. And from a client's perspective, compliance perspective or perception, cloud is bad, especially when it comes to CMDB. And oftentimes they talk about, they want to have the CMDB on-prem. So can you maybe speak a little bit to that, Mitch? I know you have, FedRAMP hosting capabilities, but maybe even expand on that to how you've helped clients tackle some of those challenges when it comes to the regulatory front.
Sure. To go a little bit more to the broader context, this has been a challenge for a long time. I was part of a utility, for example, when NERC first, if you will, kind of got more serious back in the mid 2000s and went from a standard to a law, so to speak. Like at that point in time, we were struggling to understand how virtualization fits in because we couldn't assign a specific machine to a specific process or activity. So, those are the kinds of maturing things that NERC has had to go through over the last decade plus. And really, in the latest version of the NERC standards, they're now becoming what I would call a lot more specific about how cloud works, how it works when you have these service providers. So one, the regulations have been maturing and advancing to kind of address these changes in technology. So that's one thing. Two, cloud providers have also been making advances. So Evan mentioned things like FedRAMP. So our platforms have been, we've been continuing to figure out how do we better secure everything from the encryption, the types of encryption we use, the methods for customers having, managing, and rotating keys. So there's those kinds of things. And then there's the platform itself. So FedRAMP as an example, especially for US-based utilities, that's an option for them. And it gives them a couple of, kind of built-in things like, everybody who works on FedRAMP is US-based as an example. So there are some tighter controls around who is working in that environment. And candidly, there's some better attestations that they can use for things like their audit. So FedRAMP has also helped improve that. So all the things that we're doing around the encryption areas, our platform security areas, et cetera. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the thing that we're seeing is there's two enormous factors in how does SaaS work for your environment. And by your environment, I mean your environment. So each company has a different stack of people, process, controls that make up the controls that they are then going to use to demonstrate their compliance to an entity like NERC. While ServiceNow is a part of that story, we usually see our friends and neighbors like a Templar Shield helping customers kind of rework their people processing controls to make sure that all of that stacks up together. So one is you as the entity are the only one that will ever be compliant to NERC. ServiceNow is not going to be a utility, so we can't be, but the companies like Templar Shield and ServiceNow can partner with you to do that. So one, there's a specific thing around your company. And then the second is we see that from NERC overall, they use the same standards. they had the same kind of core approaches to auditing and what they audit. But we have seen that region by region, there's slight differences to what they might do. So one of the things we suggest to customers is using a partner like Templar, working with ServiceNow, and with their auditor kind of work through, how do those controls stack up? Having said all that, we have seen multiple customers go through that journey with ServiceNow and partners to reach that point with their auditors to say, we're confident doing that. And that Fortune 500 energy company is a large US utility. And so that's the kind of thing that they did to go through it as well. So I know it's a long answer, but it's a complex question. So hopefully that helps at least kind of set a path to how you might answer that for your own organization.
That's great, Mitch. Thank you for that elaborate response as well. Nick, do you have anything to add there, or we got a few more questions?
Mitch, I think it could be good, brief. I don't know if you're comfortable talking about, the experience, and regulators that have been in the rooms when we're talking about this, or, I know I can't name names, but anything you feel you can add about how the regulators have responded to FedRAMP high environments and the data segregation model that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I think overall the response has been really good because I think they recognize one of the challenges is to meet the ever-growing and ever-advancing need. They need more technology companies who are leaning in and helping work through those automations and things of that nature. So one, they recognize for speed, they've got to rely more on the tech companies. So they, overall are looking to, provide better partnership on that. And they're also starting to look at things again, like FedRAMP, as that is a good connecting method for them to look at and be assured that that environment's compliant. And I'm using compliant specifically because the other thing they're recognizing is when you're a cloud company, security is one of your absolute core parts of your product. And we invest lots and lots of time, lots and lots of money, lots and lots of processes to making sure that we have these really tight, really secure environments. And again, that gives those regulators and honestly, a lot of our customers greater confidence in using that platform. So those are a couple of the key elements of, what's making it work and kind of where the regulators seem to kind of be moving.
Okay, that's great. We have another question here around, so we're at the moment suffering from not being able to deploy discovery and service mapping in the OT zones because it retrieves the scanning job from the Now platform into the cloud and it breaks the Purdue model. Will ServiceNow look into how to resolve this in the future?
That sounds like a deeper conversation because again, some of these examples, this energy company and also some of the oil and gas companies that are following a very similar model, we're finding ways to do that. I will say one of the key ways is the discovery we're using is no longer just ServiceNow's discovery, which is a specific type of discovery, but through those partnerships with Clarity, Nozomi, Armis, Microsoft Defender for IoT, the list is pretty long. They have some capabilities above and beyond to do passive scanning and some of the technology. So it's a little bit of, it takes a village to deal with some of the extra sensitivity of these OT environments, but we have definitely successfully crossed that bridge with some of these customers.
And so maybe on that note, if you want to take a deeper dive into that, you can reach out to us. We can take that conversation offline.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a question here about, so this goes back to like the logical separation of the data in the system. So if if you were using ServiceNow for both the OT CMDB and the IT CMDB, can you kind of elaborate or explain the way the data is separated within the actual ServiceNow data model and database?
Right. So I won't go too deep technically because there's people that are better at describing it. But there's a couple of things. One is they are separate tables that deal with the pure OT and the pure IT with some overlapping fields there. So that's one thing, is some of that is already kind of by data model separated. Secondly, when you look at how you assign roles within ServiceNow, you can give specific roles that are like, this person can only see records that have this value in the record. So if you will, Mitch can only see the ones that have Florida in the record because Mitch lives in Florida. So you can control access, actual user access based on characteristics of that actual piece of data. And then the other is you can layer on what we refer to as kind of a column level encryption. So you can further reinforce that with encryption that only certain people by their access definition can access. So there are a couple of different layers of tools that we can apply to address that model. We have a large petroleum company that we've worked with recently that wanted a higher level of segregation than we offer, if you will, out of the box. And again, we were able to use that ability to kind of turn on some filters that said, okay, well, we can add some additional filtering that's based on that user's access to solve that issue. So those are a couple of the different methods. So far, we haven't found one that we haven't been able to solve because of the levels of controls that we have around how to use the data, how do you assign roles, and the encryption methods that we have.
Yeah, and that's a great response. And I would just elaborate a little bit on that, right? And whether you're implementing it in-house or you're leveraging an implementation partner like ServiceNow, that's one of the most important aspects, both from the requirements gathering stage as well as the design stage, is to be able to understand the intersections of data so that you're logically separating it and bringing forth those best practices to make sure that there's both logical separation there when you're configuring the platform. So that's certainly a key driver behind that. We have another question around, can we customize the amount of attributes collected and populated within the ServiceNow integration with a third-party OT sensor?
So the short version to customizing ServiceNow is it's very extensible. Having started my career as a developer, I'm sure there's some limit. I haven't seen it in ServiceNow, but somebody will hit that limit. But it's very extensible, including the ability to add new tables, add columns to tables, add controls to tables, and things of that nature. So I will start with, yes, it's extensible. And back to where I was talking about the OT solution that we've developed, we have taken a big step forward in identifying that there are different attributes around, say, a PLC or an RTU or even a SCADA server that are different than the IT asset elements. So one, we have extended the data model already in our OT solution to do some of those things. The one giant red flashing caution I would put up is customizations are something that you want to approach with a lot of caution and a lot of thought. Back to any of this, you want to have a really good, strong design up front, because one of the things we see is we all get excited when we can customize something, but then later when you get your next release of ServiceNow, which we do releases, we offer releases twice a year. So our innovation cycle is really fast. Sometimes one we see a lot is something that someone spent 3 months customizing is now available in the next release. And so they invested their own resources in building something that's already being built and is about to come out. And so it's important for you to work with your partners and your ServiceNow team to figure out, what's on that roadmap and where are you best making your investments versus where are your partner or ServiceNow making investments. So one is don't work on building something that is just about to come out anyway. And by coming out as part of the platform, it's always going to be supported, et cetera. The second is, like anything, you can over customize. And when you over customize, we find a lot of customers, when they go to do their upgrades, it extends the time frame for their upgrades because they have to go through and not only test the core ServiceNow capabilities that are, if you will, kind of out of the box, but now they have to add additional testing cycles to test the things that they've customized. And there are some occasions where something that was customized was customized so far so far away from the box, so to speak, that there's functionality that starts breaking when you do upgrades. So again, yes, highly customizable, customized with great caution and in partnership with people who understand the roadmap and can help you understand, where might you be risking either extended testing times, technical debt, or breaking functionality when you make those kinds of customizations.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Thanks, Mitch. And then just on the same front, right? Scalability. You always want to keep in mind when you're customizing maturity of your processes and how often they may be changing, especially when you're just stepping into this zone. Leverage what's there before you start kind of reinventing the wheel, if you will. It's kind of a best practice. So those are just, conversations we typically have and recommendations. Mitch has been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to toss a question over to Nick. So will we require a FoxGuard subscription in order to take advantage of the advanced function in Snow for OTVM and other expanded Snow services?
Great question, right? So ServiceNow and TemplaShield, neither one of us are content companies. So the FoxGuard content for the patch availability report, the vulnerability report, yes, you will need FoxGuard subscriptions to get that. The integration to ingest that and the workflow designed for that remediation process and management process in ServiceNow, that's pre-built. You won't need additional subscription from us or ServiceNow outside of the standard licensings. Similarly, to get NERC SIP requirements or TSA regulatory requirements or intelligence for the changes that come as they do so often. We work with Unified Compliance Framework, right? So the UCF is another subscription that can be, and again, TemplaShield can resell and include these subscriptions annually into the ServiceNow resale of the licenses and or into our consulting efforts. Or we're happy if you guys purchase UCF or FoxGuard or any of the other platforms that Mitch talked about on the integration front directly from those providers. The integration capabilities is what's included in the implementations and the workflow capability. So just really want to be very forthcoming and transparent on that. The regulatory content for NERC SIP, for TSA, we typically get from Unified Compliance Framework or other compliance providers that we work with. And FoxGuard, you would need a dedicated subscription to receive both the PAR, patch availability report, and the vulnerability report.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Do we have time for one more question? No, we're right at the top of the hour. Let's throw it out there, and then we'll wrap this up. Can you talk about the possibility of two-way updates between ForeScout, iSight, iInspect, and ServiceNow OT? That may have to be an offline conversation based on the time left.
Yeah, I think especially when it sounds like it's a two-way across 3 or 4 products. I couldn't list them all. What I can tell you is for integrations, each one of those elements might have a slightly different what they do and what they're able to do one way or two way. Part of that's what ServiceNow is able to do, but a lot of that often is what that solution is like. I can't speak specifically to ForeScout, but ForeScout, for example, may offer two-way, but product Z may offer only one way. So part of it's what we ServiceNow offer as part of our side of the integration. The other is that specific product. So definitely a deeper dive, but a lot of that information's public, and certainly if you've got a ServiceNow account team that you're working with or the Templar team, they can help you connect to the right resources to go down to the right level and answer those questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And I just pinged you how to reach out to us. So again, Mitch and Nick, I want to thank you so much for the content today. Everybody that hopped on and took time of their day, thank you so much. We hope you found it insightful. Just kind of to let you know, we'll be at the DistribuTech conference, and we have a booth. We're co-sponsoring with ServiceNow, so we have a booth 1337. If you want to take a deeper dive in anything we covered today, please stop by, or if you just want to stop by and say hi, introduce yourself, we'd love to chat. And then this is one of a series of webinars we're going to be hosting. So be on the lookout for the monthly webinar series focusing on the utilities and energy sector. So just wanted to kind of give those 2 shout outs. But thank you again, Mitch. Thank you again, Nick. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.